The rain in Millbrook fell the way it always did in late October. Sideways, cold, and without apology. It hammered the tin roof of Russo's auto garage, the only repair shop still open past 6 on Route 9, and it hammered against the windshield of a silver Bentley Continental that had no business being on this side of town. Daniel Reyes heard the engine before he saw the car. It was a sound he knew the way a doctor knows a wrong heartbeat. A faint metallic stutter under the hood, the kind of noise that told him the car was running on borrowed time and didn't know it yet. He looked up from the Camry he'd been working on for the last hour, wiped his hands on a rag that hadn't been clean in years, and watched the Bentley roll, then lurch, then die completely in the middle of the flooded intersection outside his garage. He didn't know yet that the woman behind the wheel was worth $11 billion. He didn't know that her name would be on magazine covers, that 3 different boards of directors were waiting on a call from her that night, or that she had not pulled over for help from a stranger in over a decade because the last time she had, it cost her something she never got back. All Daniel knew was that someone was stranded in the rain, and his daughter was waiting for him at home with a half-finished math worksheet and a promise that he'd be there for dinner. He grabbed his jacket anyway. Part 1. The Bridge Between Two Lives. To understand why Daniel walked out into that storm without a second thought, you have to understand what the last 6 years had cost him, and what they hadn't. 6 years ago, Daniel Reyes was Staff Sergeant Reyes, attached to a unit whose name doesn't appear in most news coverage of the wars America fought quietly. He doesn't talk about those years. Not because he's hiding something dramatic. No medals he's ashamed of, no court-martial, nothing that would make for a clean villain's backstory. He doesn't talk about them because some rooms in a person's mind are load-bearing walls. You don't open those doors just to let people look around. What people in Millbrook knew was simpler. Daniel came home from his last deployment with a government check, a steel pin holding his left ankle together, and a 6-month-old daughter named Mia whose mother hadn't waited around to meet her. He used what savings he had to buy out the lease on a dying garage from a man who was happy to be rid of it, and he spent the next 5 years turning Russo's Auto, a name he kept out of respect for the old mechanic who'd taught him the trade before he ever wore a uniform, into the kind of place people trusted with cars they couldn't afford to replace. He was good at it. Genuinely, unusually good. The kind of mechanic who could hear a problem in an engine the way other people heard a cough turning into pneumonia. But good wasn't the same as profitable, not in a town where half the population drove cars older than their kids and paid in installments when they paid at all. Daniel didn't turn anyone away. He fixed brakes for single mothers and gave them 3 months to pay him back. He patched up a delivery driver's transmission for free the week the man's wife was in the hospital. He was, by any business school's definition, terrible at running a business. He was, by any human definition, exactly the kind of man this story needed standing in that garage on the night a billionaire's car broke down 400 feet from his door. His daughter Mia was 7, sharp as a tack, and already old enough to notice the particular tiredness that lived behind her father's eyes on nights when money was tighter than usual. She didn't ask him about it. She'd learned, the way kids of single parents often learn too early, which questions made the adult in the room go quiet in a way that hurt to watch. That night, she was at Mrs. Alvarez's house next door, finishing homework and waiting for her father to come pick her up for dinner, the way she did most weeknights when the garage ran late. She had no idea that her father was about to change both their lives by doing something he would have done anyway. For free for anyone, for nothing more than the fact that someone needed help and he happened to be standing close enough to give it. Vivian Cole had built an empire out of being unreachable. If you'd seen her photograph in Forbes, and you probably had since she'd been on the cover twice, you'd have seen a woman in her late 40s with the kind of composed, unreadable expression that comes from decades of being underestimated and then making people regret it. She'd built Coalworth Industries from a single failing textile mill she inherited after her father's death into a logistics and manufacturing empire that touched products in nearly every grocery store in the country. People who worked for her respected her. People who competed against her feared her. Almost no one who knew her professionally would have described her as someone who needed help from anybody, least of all a stranger in a small town she'd never planned to visit. She hadn't planned to be in Millbrook that night at all. Her usual driver, a quiet man named Theo who'd been with her for 11 years, had taken the week off for his mother's funeral, and rather than hire a temporary replacement, rather than let one more stranger into the small, controlled radius of her life, Vivian had decided to drive herself the 4 hours from the city to inspect a manufacturing plant her company had quietly acquired outside Millbrook. It was the kind of decision that looked, from the outside, like confidence. From the inside, it felt like something closer to restlessness. She hadn't been alone behind a wheel, truly alone, in longer than she could remember, and some small, stubborn part of her had wanted to feel what that was like again. She got her answer somewhere around mile marker 40, when the storm rolled in faster than the weather app had promised, and her answer got worse when the Bentley's engine, a car she paid a private mechanic an obscene retainer to keep in flawless condition, began making a sound like a dying animal. It died completely in the intersection of Route 9 and Miller Street, half a block from a garage with a hand-painted sign reading Russo's Auto, lights still on behind rain-streaked windows. Vivian sat there for a full minute, watching the wipers struggle uselessly against the downpour, running through the calculations she ran through for everything. Call roadside assistance. 45 minutes minimum in this weather, longer this far from the city. Call the office. Humiliating, and it would be all over the building by morning that Vivian Cole had broken down on the side of the road like anybody else. Walk to the garage. Undignified, possibly unsafe, definitely not something the woman on 2 Forbes covers was supposed to do. She was still running the numbers when a figure in a worn canvas jacket walked out of the garage and directly toward her car, unbothered by the rain, moving with the unhurried economy of someone who had been cold and wet before and didn't consider it an emergency. She rolled the window down 2 inches. Old habits. Car trouble? He asked, the rain running off the brim of an old cap that had seen better decades. I have roadside assistance, she said, which was true, and which was also the kind of sentence rich people use to mean I don't need anything from you. The man, Daniel, though she didn't know his name yet, looked at the hood of the car, then at the rain, then back at her with an expression that wasn't impatient or wounded, just simply unconvinced. Sure, he said, and in this weather, on this road, they'll get here in about an hour and a half, and your car will sit in 2 feet of runoff the entire time, which is bad for whatever's already wrong with it. Or you can pull it forward 30 feet into my bay, and I'll take a look while you wait somewhere dry. Your call. It was such a plain, unornamented offer that Vivian found herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, without a calculated response ready. I can't start it, she admitted. I figured, Daniel said, and without asking permission, he opened her car door, held an umbrella over her. An umbrella he'd grabbed without thinking, the same way he'd grabbed his jacket, and walked her the 30 feet to the garage while the storm did its best to drown the both of them. Here is the part of the story you're waiting for, the part the title promised you, and we're gonna get there. But first, like any good story, this one needs you to sit a moment longer in not knowing, because the not knowing is where all the meaning lives. Vivian sat in the garage's small front office. A space office is generous. It was a desk, 2 folding chairs, a space heater, and a corkboard covered in faded photographs of cars Daniel had restored over the years, while Daniel worked under the hood of her Bentley with the calm thoroughness of a surgeon. She watched him through the doorway for longer than she meant to. She noticed things. She always noticed things. It was the skill that had built her company and ruined at least one marriage. She noticed that his hands moved with a precision that didn't belong to a small-town mechanic who probably spent most of his days on oil changes. She noticed that he hummed under his breath while he worked, the same 4 bars of a song she couldn't place. She noticed a faded tattoo on his forearm, half covered by his rolled sleeve, that looked military but not in the decorative way some tattoos try to look military. She noticed, on the cluttered shelf above his workbench, a small framed photograph of a little girl missing her 2 front teeth, grinning at the camera with the kind of joy that doesn't know yet that the world will ever ask it to be careful. And she noticed, half buried under a stack of invoices on the corner of his desk, a small leather case, the kind used to hold a medal or a badge, with a corner of metal glinting where the lid had come slightly open. She didn't touch it. Not yet. That comes later, and when it comes, it's going to mean something you don't expect. For now, she sat with her coffee. He'd made her coffee, instant, in a chipped mug that said World's Okayest Mechanic, and somehow it was the best cup of coffee she'd had in months. And she watched a stranger fix her car for no reason she could identify other than the fact that it needed fixing. It's the alternator, Daniel said, finally straightening up and wiping his hands. And a belt that's about 2 weeks from snapping entirely. You're lucky it died here and not on the highway at 65. How long will it take? Vivian asked. Couple hours. I've got the belt in stock. Alternator I might have to pull from a donor part I've got in the back. Same model, different car, long story. He glanced at the clock. You want me to call you a ride into town for dinner while you wait? There's a diner 2 blocks down. Decent food. Better than sitting here watching me work. I'll stay, Vivian said, surprising herself. He shrugged, unbothered either way, and went back to work. What she didn't say, what she barely let herself think, was that she hadn't sat somewhere this quiet, this unmonitored, this free of the particular performance her life required, in years. No assistant hovering. No phone buzzing with 17 urgent things that all claim to be the most urgent. Just rain on a tin roof, the smell of motor oil, and a man humming 4 bars of a song she still couldn't place, working on her car like it was the most ordinary thing in the world to fix something for someone who could have bought the garage outright and never noticed the expense. 2 hours passed. Somewhere in the middle of them, Daniel's phone rang, and she watched his entire posture change. Not tense, exactly, but attentive in a different register. The way a parent's voice changes when their kid is on the line. Hey, Mija, he said, and something in his face softened in a way it hadn't for the entire conversation with Vivian, polite as that conversation had been. I know. I'm sorry, baby. I got held up. Yeah. A car broke down outside the shop. I had to help. I'll be there in. He glanced at the Bentley, did the math. 45 minutes, I promise. Tell Mrs. Alvarez I owe her a pie. Love you. Almost done. He hung up and went back to work like nothing had happened. But Vivian sat very still in that folding chair, turning something over in her mind. A man with a daughter waiting for him, who had walked out into a storm to help a stranger who, by every visible signal, did not need his help, and who had not once, in 2 hours, asked her name, her job, or why a Bentley was driving alone on Route 9 in a storm. He hadn't asked because it hadn't occurred to him that it mattered. To him, she was just a person whose car had broken down. That was the whole equation. It had been, by Vivian's count, 11 years since anyone had treated her like just a person. The car was fixed a little after 9. Daniel ran it for a few minutes to make sure the new belt held, listened to the engine the way other people listen to music, and nodded, satisfied. You're good, he said, closing the hood. Belt and alternator, both solid for years now if you keep up the maintenance schedule. I wrote it on the invoice. What do I owe you? Vivian asked, already reaching for the bag that held, among other things, a checkbook that had ended boardroom standoffs. Daniel waved a hand. Don't worry about it. She actually laughed, a short, surprised sound. I'm serious. You spent 2 hours on a luxury car at 9 o'clock at night in a storm. You have a daughter waiting for you. Let me pay you. And I'm serious too, Daniel said. And there was no performance in it, no false modesty, just the plain fact of how he saw the world. You were stuck in the rain. I had the part. Took 2 hours of a Tuesday I wasn't doing anything else with. That's not a transaction, that's just what you do. He shrugged, already walking toward the office to grab his jacket. Go home. Drive safe. Roads are still bad past the bridge. It was while he was in the office, pulling his jacket off the hook, that Vivian, without entirely deciding to, stepped toward the desk and looked again at that small leather case, the one with the corner of metal glinting where the lid had come open. She doesn't know, even now, exactly why she reached for it. Call it the same restlessness that had put her behind the wheel of her own car that night. Call it the particular kind of curiosity that comes from watching someone be inexplicably, unprofitably kind and needing to understand why. She lifted the lid an inch further. Inside, resting on a bed of cracked velvet, was a military identification badge, the photo on it younger than the man currently shrugging into his jacket 6 feet away, but unmistakably him. Below the photo, a name, a rank, and beneath that, a unit designation that Vivian recognized. Not because she was military herself, but because 11 years ago, her younger brother Marcus had served in a unit with that exact designation in the exact region, during the exact stretch of months that ended with a phone call she still couldn't think about without her chest tightening. Marcus hadn't come home. The official report had been thin, careful, the kind of language designed to protect people from details rather than inform them. For 11 years, Vivian had known the shape of her brother's death and almost nothing of its substance. Only that his unit had been engaged in something that never made the news, and that 2 men from that unit had, according to a letter she'd received months later from a stranger she never met, carried him the last half-mile when he couldn't walk on his own, refusing to leave him even when staying meant risking themselves. She had never learned those men's names. The letter had been unsigned, sent by someone who said only that he'd promised Marcus he'd let his sister know he hadn't died alone. Vivian Cole stood in a cluttered garage office in Millbrook, holding a badge with a stranger's face on it, and felt 11 years of carefully managed grief crack open like ice under too much weight. "Ma'am," Daniel's voice behind her. She turned, and whatever was on her face must have been unmistakable, because his own expression shifted instantly from polite distance to something more careful. "I'm sorry," he said, stepping forward. "That's personal stuff. I should have put it away." "What unit?" Vivian said. Her voice didn't sound like hers. "This badge. What unit, what years?" Daniel's jaw tightened, the particular tightness of a man being asked to open a door he kept permanently shut. "Ma'am, I don't really—" "Please." She set the badge down with hands that weren't entirely steady. "My brother, Marcus Cole. He served with a unit with this designation. Same years, far as I can tell. He didn't come home." Her voice cracked on the last 4 words in a way that surprised her more than it surprised him. "I got a letter once, and signed, from someone who said they carried him when he couldn't walk. Said they wouldn't leave him." The garage went very quiet. Outside, the rain had finally started to ease, ticking softer against the roof. Daniel didn't say anything for a long moment. When he did speak, his voice had dropped into a register Vivian hadn't heard from him all evening. Older, heavier, a voice that had been carrying something for a long time and hadn't expected to ever have to set it down in front of a stranger. "What was his call sign?" Daniel asked quietly. "Not his name. His call sign." Vivian's hands were shaking now. "Coyote," she said. "They called him Coyote. He hated it. Said it made him sound like he howled at the moon." Something moved behind Daniel's eyes, recognition, grief, and something that looked almost like relief, the specific relief of a weight finally finding the hands it was meant to be handed to. "He did howl, actually," Daniel said, and his voice caught. "Bad singer, worse howler. Used to do it just to annoy Petrov on watch." He sat down slowly on the edge of his workbench, like his legs had decided this conversation required sitting. "Ma'am, I'm the one who carried him the last half-mile. Me and a guy named Petrov who didn't make it home from the deployment after that one. I wrote that letter." For a long moment Vivian Cole, $11 billion, 2 Forbes covers, a corner office on the 41st floor of a building with her name etched into the lobby, simply stood in a small-town garage and cried, the way she had not let herself cry in 11 years, not at the funeral, not at the unveiling of the memorial wall, not once, because crying had felt like a door that, once opened, might never close again, and she'd had a company to run and a board to answer to and a face that couldn't afford to crack. Cracked now. Daniel didn't try to fix it or rush it or hand her a tissue and change the subject the way people sometimes do when grief makes them uncomfortable. He just stayed where he was, quiet, present, the same way he'd been present for Marcus 11 years ago when there was nothing left to do but stay. "He talked about you," Daniel said eventually, when her breathing had steadied. "Said his sister was going to take over their dad's company and turn it into something. Said you didn't take anyone's nonsense. Not even his." Faint, tired smile. "He was proud of you. Talked about you more than most guys talked about anybody back home." "Why didn't you sign the letter?" Vivian asked, wiping her face with the back of her hand, no longer caring how undignified the gesture was. Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words the careful way people choose words around old wounds. "Because signing it felt like asking for something. Credit, maybe, or absolution. I don't know. I just wanted you to know he wasn't alone, and I didn't want that fact to be about me." He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had spent the last 2 hours fixing her car without asking who she was. "Some things you do because they need doing, not because you want your name on them." It was, Vivian realized, the exact same sentence he'd said about fixing her car 20 minutes earlier. That's not a transaction, that's just what you do. The thread ran straight through him, from a battlefield half a world away to a garage on Route 9. The same quiet, unornamented decency, applied without discrimination to a dying soldier and a stranded stranger. I have to know, Vivian said. Everything. What happened. What he was like at the end. I've spent 11 years with an official report that told me almost nothing. Daniel nodded slowly. It's not a short conversation. And some of it I haven't said out loud since I came home. Not to anybody, not even people who'd understand it. He glanced toward the office clock, then toward his phone, where a 7-year-old girl was waiting with a math worksheet and a promise about dinner. I have to go get my daughter, he said. But I'm not going to tell you the short version of this and let you drive home with half of it. If you want the whole thing, and I think you do, you're welcome to come with me. We can talk over dinner. Mia's used to me bringing home strays. A small, tired smile. No offense. Vivian Cole, who had not accepted an unplanned dinner invitation from anyone in over a decade, who calculated risk for a living and rarely got it wrong, looked at this stranger who had just handed her the missing 11 years of her brother's death, and said, "None taken." Mrs. Alvarez's porch light was on when they pulled up, Vivian following in the Bentley, Daniel in his battered pickup ahead of her, an arrangement that felt almost comically mismatched and somehow exactly right. Mia came barreling out the front door the second she saw her father's truck. 7 years old and full of the particular energy of a kid who has been patient for as long as she's capable of being patient, which in her case was about 40 extra minutes. You said 45 minutes and it's been an hour, she announced, full of righteous indignation, before she noticed the silver car idling at the curb and the unfamiliar woman stepping out of it. Her expression shifted instantly from indignant to curious. Whose car is that? This is Miss Vivian, Daniel said. Crouching to her eye level the way Vivian noticed he did automatically, without thinking, the same unconscious decency that ran through everything he did. Her car broke down outside the shop. I fixed it. She's going to have dinner with us, if that's okay with you. Mia considered this with the gravity of a 7-year-old evaluating a major life decision. Do you like spaghetti? She asked Vivian directly. Because that's what we're having, and Dad burns the garlic bread sometimes, but it's still good. I love spaghetti, Vivian said, and found, to her own surprise, that she meant it more than she'd meant almost anything she'd said in a boardroom in the last 5 years. Dinner happened in a kitchen that could have fit inside Vivian's walk-in closet, at a table with one wobbly leg propped up with a folded napkin, while Mia narrated, in exhaustive detail, the plot of a cartoon involving a dragon who was afraid of fire, a detail she found both funny and deeply unfair to dragons in general. Vivian listened, laughed in the right places, and felt something loosen in her chest that had been clenched for so long she'd forgotten it was clenched at all. After Mia had been put to bed, a ritual involving exactly one specific stuffed rabbit and a very particular order of nightlight settings, Daniel and Vivian sat at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee neither of them really wanted, and he told her everything. He told her about the mission that wasn't supposed to go the way it went. He told her about Marcus's stubborn insistence on humor in the worst moments, the howling, the terrible singing, the way he'd kept making jokes even when his leg gave out and he knew, on some level, what that meant. He told her about the half-mile, carrying his weight between 2 men who refused to leave him, about Petrov's voice the whole way telling Marcus stories about a girl back home he'd never actually had the courage to ask out, just to keep him talking, keep him present, keep him fighting to stay conscious. He told her about the last thing Marcus said, which he had never told anyone, which he almost didn't tell her now except that some weights are simply too heavy to carry alone for 11 years, and Vivian Cole had earned the right to help him put it down. He said, "Tell my sister I wasn't scared," Daniel said quietly, his voice rough. Said it twice like he needed to make sure it landed. I don't know if it was true. I think it might have been the bravest lie a man ever told on purpose. But I promised him I'd tell you, and then I didn't know how to find you, and then time passed, and the letter felt like the only way I had left to keep that promise without making it about me. Vivian sat with that for a long time, the coffee going cold between her hands, 11 years of grief finally getting the missing piece it had been circling without ever finding. "Thank you," she said eventually, "for carrying him, for staying, for the letter, for tonight." She paused. For not asking who I was before you fixed my car. Daniel almost smiled at that. Would it have mattered? No, Vivian admitted. And that might be the most surprising part of this whole night. Here is where a lesser story would have Vivian Cole write Daniel Reyes a check large enough to buy 10 garages, and call it gratitude. That isn't what happened because Daniel would have refused it the same way he refused payment for the car, and Vivian, 11 years into running a company built on understanding what people actually need rather than what looks generous on paper, knew better than to insult him with the wrong kind of thank you. What she did instead, over the following months, was quieter and more lasting. Coalworth Industries had, for years, run a foundation that supported veterans transitioning out of service job placement programs, mostly the kind of well-funded, modestly effective initiative that companies maintain for good optics and genuine if limited good. Vivian sat down with the foundation's director the week after Millbrook and asked a single question that changed its entire direction. What if, instead of placing veterans in jobs that existed, we funded the businesses they were already quietly running themselves, the ones nobody noticed because the owners were too busy fixing other people's problems to ask for help with their own? Russo's Auto Garage got a no-strings grant that cleared every debt Daniel had quietly carried for years, covering customers who couldn't pay, keeping the lights on through slow seasons, all of it. It also got an offer, which Daniel almost refused out of habit before Mia, with the blunt wisdom of a 7-year-old, told him, "Dad, you let everyone else have help. Why can't you?" An offer to expand into a second bay, hire a part-time mechanic, and finally take a weekend off without the shop closing entirely. But the foundation's redirection didn't stop with one garage. It became a model, a small, unglamorous, deeply effective one, for finding and supporting people exactly like Daniel, scattered through small towns everywhere, people who'd spent years being quietly, unprofitably decent without anyone noticing or rewarding it. Vivian named the initiative herself, over Daniel's protests that it really wasn't necessary. She called it the Coyote Fund. Daniel found out about the name only after the first round of grants had already gone out. He didn't say much when he found out. He just sat with it for a while, the way he sat with most things, and then drove out to a quiet stretch of road outside town where, every year on the anniversary, he still went to be alone for an hour. That year, for the first time, he wasn't alone there. Vivian came too, and they stood together saying nothing in particular, which turned out to be exactly the right amount to say. If you came to this story for the badge, for the moment of recognition, for the gasp, for the dramatic turn where a single dad's quiet kindness collides with a billionaire's hidden grief, you got it. That moment happened, and it was real and it mattered. But stories like this one are never really about the badge. The badge is just the mechanism, the lever that opens a door that was always going to need opening eventually. The actual story is smaller and larger than that all at once. It's about a man who walked into a storm for a stranger because that's simply what you do when someone needs help and you're standing close enough to give it, with no calculation about who they were or what it would cost him. It's about a woman who'd built an empire on being unreachable, finally getting 11 years of grief handed back to her by someone who'd carried far more of it, far longer, without ever asking for anything in return. It's about the particular, ordinary heroism of people who fix things, cars, grief, broken pieces of other people's lives, and never once think to mention it, because to them it was never a transaction. It was just what you do. Daniel Reyes still runs Russo's Auto Garage. He still hums 4 bars of a song nobody else recognizes while he works. Mia is 8 now, still narrates cartoon plots with the gravity of a foreign policy briefing, and has informed her father with great confidence that Miss Vivian, who visits more often now than either of them planned for, and who has gotten considerably better at not burning the garlic bread, is basically family now. Dad, you should probably just say so. He hasn't said so yet, not in those exact words. But some things you don't have to announce. Some things you just do, quietly, without asking for credit, because that's what you do when someone needs you, and you happen to be standing close enough to give it. That, in the end, was always the whole story.